Good morning and welcome back to Spidz YouTube. It's been a little while, but today we're going to go over a little bit of introduction for the CDS as well as my thoughts on the draft for the second time now. So a quick table of contents so you can scry through what's relevant and what's not. We'll start with a small introduction to who I am and what the CDS is, just in case you're unfamiliar with either. I'll talk over what theory I came up with before I did the draft and also comparing a little bit to last CDS if you were around for that one. I want to talk about what happened during the draft, like the play-by-play decisions. And then I want to talk about a little bit on some post-draft theory. Then I'll say my expectations for the rest of the CDS over the next 9 or 10 weeks. There will be a bit of comparison to the previous CDS draft thoughts, not a lot. It's not necessary viewing, but if you watch that for CDS 1, you'll know a bit of my frameworks on how to do a draft, just a little bit. So who am I? I've had minor Riot tourney success. I was top 32 in A Curious Journey, top 8 from Forces and Beyond, top 32 in the Heart of the Huntress World Qualifier Open. I know it's a lot of acronyms. And top 64 Heart of the Huntress Eternal, and I was also around for the World Qualifier, Championship Qualifier stuff for Worlds 2022. I'm also the only winner of CDS so far. This will probably not be the case in a couple of weeks, but for now I am the only winner of CDS. I also have done a little bit of I've done vaguely okay in Aegis, but if you know me from Aegis, you probably don't need this introduction to begin with. I typically enjoy aggro-slanted mid-range decks, or tempo-heavy decks, provided they're not Ionia, because Ionia is basically a tempo region. But I've been branching out relatively recently towards Stally control decks. So an example of an aggro-slanted mid-range deck that I like is Scouts or Pirates or Sivaraksha. A non-Ionian tempo-heavy deck that I like, these sorts of decks are Red Gwen, Aphelios, Winding Light, and Sivaraksha. And then if you're Stally control decks, things more like Karmaset Targon, Nora Vygar, and Sivaraksha. I also do some other things. I cast on occasion. I made a meme with Sleepy Punda once that I put on Twitter. That was pretty funny. So I just do a bunch of random things. This is my team. It is the Redeemed Qualities. If you remember last time, my team was called the Redeemable Qualities, but since we won, we have very clearly been redeemed. I want to talk a little bit about the logo, just because it's got a bunch of little Easter eggs that I think are cool. I've obviously got the Bilgewater and Targon earrings in reference to Taskmaster and Mountain Sojourners, which are my favorite cards. I've got this little chain that says 4 because last time I ended up picking a bunch of 4-mana champions completely unintentionally. And so I thought I would include something to honor that. And then I've got a crown because I won last time. And if you see right here in the crown that I'm spinning, you can see a little champion, orange hexagon. At the bottom of a champion card, there's an orange hexagon. This is very good. Same person that made the logos last time made this, as well as all the other logos that you'll see. They're very, very good. All right, so what is the CDS? You have 10 American content-y people drafting champions and playing in a weekly tourney. Each player fights another player each week. You fight every player once throughout the series. And you draft champions, and there'll be more on this later. This is the whole point of this video is about drafting the champions. And then the top 6 go to Top Cut, which I'll explain a little bit more later. What is the point of the CDS? Now, I think this is something that I don't think I necessarily spoke about too much last time. But Pink Ghost talked a lot about it in his post-CDS 1 thoughts that he streamed. But basically, the point of the CDS is sort of interesting. One, it's a new take on a tournament series, unlike Aegis, where it's just get the best players to play in what is just the regular format. This tries to do something a little bit different. It's trying to bridge casual and competitive play a little. The idea is that when Pink Ghost does the recaps or whatever, or content people make videos or stream it, right? It's not just a tournament where everyone is trying to grind to be the best player and doing the best stuff. Instead, it's trying to be something that's a little bit more open and appealing, because what Pink Ghost notified is that, or noticed, is that there was a big difference between casual players and competitive players and how they respond to the LoR community. And I think one of his examples is it is hard for a platinum player to justify joining a Mastering or Interra tournament or paying attention to tournaments at all, because he has to fight the likes of Floppy Mudkip and Card Gamer and Shardox and Margin Bay and Jason Florent. And it's a very demoralizing experience because these things are very, very high up there. And maybe for some people that's okay. But the point of the CDS is to have something that is a tournament that is sort of accessible for everyone in order to be interested in tournaments. Obviously not to participate, because we have to have some level of elitism. I'm joking. But that was sort of part of the reason why this is a thing. And I think that's a really interesting format. And the fact that it has a bunch of content-y people is very interesting to me, and trying to turn this basically into an artificial content machine. If people complain that LoR doesn't have enough content, then you need people to be making this content, and Pink Ghost is sort of an arbiter to try and influence others to be making content, which I think is interesting. Anyway, about the CDS, there's also a public spreadsheet for you to follow along if you want to see what champions are drafted, what the rules are. Just read the rules yourself, see the scores, see the standings, all these sorts of things. There is a public spreadsheet. If you're familiar with Aegis, it's very, very similar. That'll be in the description. It's pretty and it's clear, and I will be using it a little bit in this video so you can sort of get used to how it looks and how to navigate it. All right. How does CDS work? I'm going to be talking about how CDS works in 3 separate sections, starting from like the more great thing and then going down and down and down. So first I'll talk about the season structure, then I'll talk about the gameplay structure, and then the drafting structure. So in the season structure, yesterday we drafted champions. Every Monday-ish, for me it's Tuesdays because I'm Australian, we play. There's no official stream for the 9 weeks. This is one of the big things Pink Ghost was big on. Instead, many people will elect to stream their own perspective. So all the other players like Sir Termund and Marge and Bay and Grandpa Roji and Cephalopod are all big streamers. I'm one of the few people that just doesn't stream. But that's one of the big things, that there will be people streaming their games at the Monday times. You can see what time it is, like each games are streamed or each games are played on the schedule page. I won't be streaming my games, but I might give it a try once because it's something that I think is worth giving a shot, right? Seeing if I like streaming. I've never been a big fan of Twitch.com. I just don't really get the culture behind it. I feel like it's something that I should give a shot just in case. If I enjoy it, then it's great. It's something I can do, right? Every weekend, the CDS YouTube posts like a recap of the week video. This is very interesting and cool, and it's honestly one of my favorite things about the CDS. The content stuff that Pink Ghost makes is actually really fun, and it sort of saddens me how few views it gets. Like, there are currently interviews going on right now, about half of them have been uploaded. And they're really cool, and I wish more people like watched them and interacted with them. Anyway, there might be more than just recaps this time around. I'm not going to spoil anything that Pink Ghost is doing, but he has hinted to me that there will be more than just recaps. So please check out the CDS YouTube channel. There should hopefully be a link in the description. It's very much worth watching. Anyway, these are the rules for the season. I'm not going to read through all of them. I'm just going to quickly summarize it. Basically, you've got 9 weeks. You're going to fight every opponent once. It's a best of 3, and going 2-0 is better than going 2-1 against an opponent. Top 6 top cut. The way the top 6 top cut works is that seeds 3 through 6 do a quarterfinals. The winners fight seeds 1 and 2 in the semifinals, and then the finals play out like a finals, right? That's all you really need to know. There's a lot more nuance and intricacy here. If you want, you can read this yourself. It's not too important for what we're going to be talking about today. All right, how does the CDS work in terms of gameplay? Best of 3s are played against each opponent, and you have a week to prepare your decks because you're fighting one opponent each week. The deck building rules, they're normal Riot Lock rules, which means no duplicate region pairings and no duplicate champions across decks. I should also mention there is still one ban, and you have to, it's sort of like the Conquest format. You have to win with each of your decks once. So if you 2-0, it means you've won with each of your decks once, and they banned your other deck. But there's also additional rules because it's the Champion Draft Series. There is something called Divergent Lock. It is obligatory to use all 6 champion slots in your deck. And you must, in order to use a region in your deck, have at least one champion from that region in your deck. And you're only allowed one mono region deck. So what do I mean by this? If you've got like a Gwen, Katarina, Zoe, Victor, Janna, Nyla lineup, that's all good, right? You've got 3 different region combinations. You've got Noxus SI, Piltover Targon, and Bilgewater PNZ. That's fine. If you do Gwen, Katarina, Zoe, Victor, and Sivarakshan Demacia, that doesn't work. For Sivarakshan Demacia does not feature a Demacian champion. It would have to be mono Sivarakshan. Or, if you see the next line, if you had a 1x Garen in your draft, or just Garen at all, you could put 1 Garen in your Sivarakshan deck, and then boom, congratulations. You have got a lineup that is sufficient under the Divergent Lock rules. If you wanted to bring Gwen, Katarina, Elise, Darius, and Janna Nilla, that would not be allowed because you've got 2 Noxus Shadow Isles. And you also couldn't bring something like Sundisk, Mono, Garen J4 Elites, and like Mist Wraiths. And by Mist Wraiths, it's going to be something like Callista, Nocturne. Right? That's not good. There's too many mono region decks. You're only allowed 1. Actually, hold on. That might actually no longer be true. I'm going to quickly double check and see if that's true when I'm editing this, because I remember Pinko saying he might no longer make that a rule, and I may or may not have sort of skimmed the rules as opposed to reading them fully. But Gwen, Katarina, Sundisk, and Sivarakshan 1x Garen, perfectly cromulent. You can find yourself doing that. The drafting structure. So last time, there were 4 tiers. There was an S tier, A tier, B tier, and C tier. You're allowed 1 S tier champion, 2 A tier champions, 4 B tier champions, and up to 8 C tier champions, up to a maximum of 10 champions. That has been completely different. There is now a points buy system. I don't expect you to read this entire graph. We will be going over this in more detail at some point. This top line shows how many points a champion costs. So Janna, Twisted Fate, and Victor cost 15, while Nico and Pike cost 6. Obviously, most of them cost 10 because that is the average, because you're getting 10 champions and you have 100 points. Like last time, it is a snake draft, meaning that out of the 10 players that are participating, the first player goes, then the second, then the third, all the way to the 9th and 10th, and then it goes 9, 10, 7, 9, 10, 8. I know my numbers. I graduated number class back to 3, 2, 1. But last time, trading only happened in 1 week. This time, trading has opened up a lot more. There are 2 types of trades. You can trade between other players, or you can trade with the pool of unpicked champions. There would be about 13 to 9 by the end, depending on how things go. So between people trading can happen at any time. But by the end of this trade, right, so I say to someone, hey, I will give you my Twisted Fate, you give me your Janna. Provided that at the end of the trade, no player has points going over 100, you'll be fine, right? So if I've got a Nico worth 6 and someone else has a Janna worth 15, I am not allowed to do that trade unless I've got 9 points just hanging around, right? If I ended my draft with 9 excess points and I had a Nico and someone else had a Janna and we wanted to do this trade, we could. But if I didn't have 9 excess points, I couldn't do it because I'd end up having over 100. Trading with unpicked champions, aka the center, can only happen 3 times during the entire season. The only time you're allowed to do it other than those 3 times is if your champ has been negatively affected by a balance change. So if Trundle's Ice Pillar starts to cost like 2 extra mana, or if, Trundle has 1 less health, or if Janna costs 7 mana all of a sudden, then it's free to trade with the center. The point costs won't change, so Janna will always cost 15 for the rest of the tournament. But if Janna gets negatively affected by a balance change, you're allowed to, for free, put Janna in, get your 15 points back, and get something else. You can also read all these rules again in the public Google Sheet. All right, the draft order starts with Slay, then it goes to me, then it goes to Sir Termund, then Shardox, then Margin Bay, then Cephalopod, then FTP Bust, then L Games Brazil, then J Sensational, then Grandpa Roji. And you can see I've highlighted myself in red. Unlike last time, I am not 10th, I'm 2nd, which does change things a little bit, but not too much. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. All right, what are the tiers? I'm going to split this into high, medium, and low. If you just look at these tiers, 15 through 12, you can see that 15's got Janna, TF, Victor, 14 has Akshan, Teemo, Aphelios, and Sivir, 13 has Nora, Elise, Seraphine, Gwen, Jarvan IV, and Vi, and 12 has Fizz, Zoe, Vayne, Alawi, Caitlyn, MF, Nah, Jace, Kindred, Poppy, Hyma, Trundle, Set, and Jack. If you're listening to this instead of watching, I just wanted to read them aloud just in case. The only notes I really want to make about the high tiers is that Sivir is pretty overcosted. I think Sivir should be like 12, maybe 12 and a half if you're pushing it. But I don't think Sivir is that inherently strong, and she's in the likes of like Aphelios, right? And I think like you could have put some of the 13s in 14. But in general, I think things are pretty accurately costed. I don't think there's anything too blasphemous outside of like Sivir and maybe like 1 or 2 other things that are like half a tier or 1 tier off. Unlike last time where like being a tier off was like a massive deal, being 1 number off here is only like a very minor upside, right? It should be mentioned that most PNZ is rather expensive. A lot of these champions are from PNZ. But that's all I wanted to mention here. In the middle, we have 11 costs being Annie, Nilla, Draven, Varus, Lulu, Jax, Yumi, Fiora, Ziggs, Lee Sin, Azir, Jinx, Katarina, Garen, Leona, Quinn, Rumble, and Sejuani. For 10, we have Diana, Shen, Samira, which is kind of funny to see Samira here. Lucian, Ezreal, LeBlanc, Riven, Zed, Jhin, Pantheon, Nidalee, Kalista, Taric, Gangplank, Kayn, Ornn, Lux, Senna, Swain. That kind of rhymed. Taric, Gangplank, Kayn, Ornn, Lux, Senna, Swain. Anyway, Thresh, Aatrox, Darius, Viego, Volibear. And then for 9, we have Tryndamere, Maokai, Lissandra, Nami, Ashe, Galio, Echo, Nocturne, Sion, Shyvana, Veigar, Kayle, Udyr, Hecarim, Nasus, and Braum. I don't really have any comments on these. These are just very average. For the low tiers, we have for 8 mana, Kennen, Zillion, Yasuo, Malphite, Tristana, Bard, Eve, Aesol, Renekton, Kench, Rek'Sai, Karma, Talia, and Vladimir. For 7, we have Ahri, Kaisar, Anivia, Nautilus, Ryze, Xerath, Aurelia, the Poro King, Soraka, and Yi. And then for 6, we have Nico and Pyke. I think I just want to comment here that like Renekton, Tristana, and Zillion and Kaisar are all relatively cheap and they're pretty decent budget options. They're not like that bad at all. And I also don't think Nico is that bad at all. I think Nico could have actually costed 7 or 8 and it still would have been pretty cromulent. Like Nico plus any Freljord or Noxus or Shurima deck will just give you an aggro-slanted mid-range deck, or Warden if it's Freljord. And Bard is very, very similar to that, and you can see Bard costs like 2 more. And I actually think Nico might be slightly better than Bard depending on the regions. So I'm very surprised to see Nico so low. I think Nico is like a vague steal. Okay, let's talk about the drafting strategy. So this is pretty different from last time. Compared to last time, there are like 2 major differences. First off, last time there was a major misevaluation in the tiers, and if you combine the misevaluation in the tiers with the massive potential of what happened last time, where if you capitalize on the misevaluation, you get like a massive boon, isn't as much of a case this time. So like Varus, Pantheon, and Alawi, like if it was in this system, they're like 3 or 4 less than they should have costed, right? One way of viewing what my draft was like last time is that I basically had like 5 A tier champions, right? I had the 2 intended A tier champions, and then I had also Varus, Pantheon, and Alawi, because they should have been A tier and they're instead B tier. That is like not necessarily the case this time. For the more granular the point systems are, like the tiers are, basically the point systems are just like excess tiers. The more fine-tuned you can make your drafting things. So like we're not going to see massive blowouts like we did with those last time, right? No caps on tiers means I no longer have to think about min-maxing value per tier, right? So last time, one of the methods by which I had to like process information was saying, well, what is the best S tier for me? What is the best 2 A tiers for me? What are the best 4 B tiers for me? Because there isn't any cap on tier, this sort of logic doesn't necessarily have a 1-to-1 correlation the new system, which means that thinking about a draft, I have to think a lot more laterally and across the board regarding like where I want to like get my picks from. There's no sort of restriction, which means I have to think about more things when making decisions, right? This means I have less opportunity to desire specific champions after around round 3 because the pool is still rather open, right? So like, I guess it's not less opportunity, but rather like there's less innate restrictions forcing me to think about picking champions in a very specific way. I'm no longer able just to focus on what's happening in A versus happening in B. What are my strengths and weaknesses? So because I'm second pick, it means that I'm going to view the draft as my first pick, then it goes away from me, then it comes back, and then I've got a second pick, Slay picks 2 things, and I got my third pick, right? So I'm viewing the draft as my first pick, then my second and third pick, then my 4th and 5th pick, then my 6th and 7th, then my 8th and 9th, and then finally my 10th. I can pretty much near guarantee a first champion. I can pretty reliably, from a group of like 8 to 13 champions, get like a second and third that I pretty desperately want as well. So the vague idea that I came into my brain, right? This was, I didn't have that much time to think about the draft, partly because it was only released relatively late, and I've also been a little bit busy. So I only really focused on like draft strategy for like maybe 2 or 3 hours with Janspot. But my strategy was, for rounds 1 and 3, pick beloved champions that I think are really, really inherently strong on their own and that I enjoy playing with so I don't hate myself during the draft. Like, I'm not going to pick Lurk. And then through 4 and 7, I wanted to sort of flesh out the like bulk of my draft with like desirable regions with champions that feel pretty safe within those regions. I'm thinking like you want to get like a Bandle City, you want to get like some access to like a mid-range region, these sorts of things, right? And then rounds 8 and 10, when a lot of things are gone, is to pick synergistic champions, right? If I've got like an Aurelia that's sort of just hanging around, I should probably pick up like an MF or an Azir, right? Or math out scenarios, right? I will have X amount of coins at a certain time. Let's figure out what these scenarios are. Let's go into these a little bit more detail. So rounds 1 to 3, pick beloved champions. I've written this all down in a notebook, but I scrolled over the notebook. So like I can't show the notebook now because it's going to give you spoilers for what the draft was. But for my first pick, my thinking was either Janna, Gwen, or Aphelios. These were the champions that I think are like incredibly strong, and I get to basically pick whatever I want. So I thought if one of these will be available, in fact, 2 of these will be available minimum, if not all 3, by the time I get to make a decision. And so I wanted to get one of these. These are just the champions that I quite like and that I think would be lots of fun for me to play. Then for second and third picks, so by the time it comes around back to me, if any of the following were available, Janna, Gwen, and Aphelios still, but also if like Gnar or Draven or Leona or Alawi or Nilla, why does Alawi have the PNZ color? That should be Bilgewater, are available, then I should pick them up. I think they're very, very strong champions, and I think they do very, very, very strong things. I also had Fizz here. Fizz is because Jansport is like obsessed with Fizz, and I felt like if all 5 of those were gone, but Fizz was still available, I should probably just take Fizz, because I agree that objectively Fizz is a really strong card in a lot of ways, but I just don't like him. All right, rounds 4 to 7 was to pick desirable regions. I made this tier list in my notes of regions that I want, right? So S tier, I really want to target an SI. In A tier, I wanted either Shreema or Demacia. If you remember last time, I sort of see these as very, very similar. They don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of control versus aggro, right? You can build aggro and you can build control, but they're not really what they're built for. They basically both say the same mid-range nonsense, right? Just in slightly different ways. But I think having access to one of them is still quite valuable. Then Noxus, then in B tier, I wanted like a PNZ, a Bilgewater, and a Bandle City. I put Freljord slightly below B tier, but I think it's still quite valuable, and then Ionia in the C tier. These aren't based on like meta logics. They're built on like how valuable these felt for me last draft and how much I enjoy playing these as regions, basically. Picks 4 to 7 were basically just about me having most of the regions that I wanted, right? Except from the regions that I got from 1, 2, and 3, right? So this is like filling in the gaps afterwards. Some specific notes about like the choices in rounds 4 and 7. I had noted that like, with the exception of Galio, pretty much every Demacian champ is equal in value. I think there's like some betterness in like Vayne and Fiora. I think they're slightly better than the rest of the pack. But like Garen and Quinn and Lucian and Shyvana all sort of say the same thing, and it doesn't really matter to me which one I get. Which meant to me that I could probably pick Demacia at 6th or 7th as opposed to 4th and 5th, and I'll be pretty happy. Like, I'm not going to have a big issue. It's not going to bother me too much. In addition, I did want to pick my Bandle City 4 and 5 because whatever other region the Bandle City champion has will inform my choices for 6 and 7, right? If it's of a new region, it means I've got a lot more flexibility in my 6 and 7. But if it's of a region that I've already gotten, it means I have to be a lot more difficult with my 6 and 7. But if a lot of Bandle City champions are gone after 4 and 5 and I have to like make a more tough decision in 6 and 7, I have to pick like a lower tier Bandle City champion that may have be like superfluous region-wise or not be a good way to access the other region, right? I'm thinking like Heimerdinger would be a bad way to access PNZ unless you can really support him, right? Okay. Then rounds and 10s, pick synergistic champions or math out scenarios. Let's say I have 21 points before round 8 starts. That means I could get something like a 9 point and a 7 point and a 6 point, and the 6 points are just Nico and Pike, or I could get a 10 point and an 8 point and then have 3 spare points, which might be useful for trading, but then I only have a 9 champ roster, which is perfectly cromulent. These sorts of things, right? If you have X amount of points, you can do a lot of like mathed out scenarios with your last few things. Many champs will be gone at this point, and thus I could make a pretty good contingency plan, right? I can save like an awkward pick. Say I pick a Zia for stream access. I can get Aurelia or Xerath afterwards, right? I can also double up on desirable regions, provided that they're not all gone, right? If I want a second Bilgewater or second Noxus or second PZ or second SI, I could do this during these rounds, right? That was pretty much my thinking for rounds 8 and 10. I had a few more notes in my notebook, but I couldn't find anywhere else to put them in this structure, so I'm just going to put them here. I did write some ideal 4ths and 5ths. Those would have been Kennen, Ziggs, Caitlyn, and Lulu. If any of them were available by 4 and 5, I think I should have picked them up. There was something that was sort of like that Jansport was really obsessed with, which I called the round 8 and 9 gambit. If I pick Rek'Sai or Echo on round 8, I can force Slay to pick either Zillion or Pike, and then I would just pick Rek'Sai or Zillion right afterwards, or pick Echo or Rek'Sai right afterwards, right? This is something that Jansport was pretty big on. I think it's slightly memey. By the way, you could also do this for round 9, and then when it goes around the whole thing, they have to get the second half, and then you get like Rek'Sai, right? Or Zillion or whatever, based on like the logic of how you're building this. I think it's a little bit memey, and I think hate drafting is like very, very rarely worth it in this format. I don't think there's actually like that good of a reason to hate draft, because it only will help you out like 1 out of 10 times, except for like the finals where like it could matter, but that's like a really difficult thing to bank on. The closest I think anyone got to hate drafting was just getting rid of Malphite from Roji, who left it up for a little bit, which is a little bit of spoilers, but yeah. Do we need all 10 champions? 2 low-cost champions, such as Nico and Ahri, are probably worse lineup construction-wise than having something expensive like a J4 or a Misfortune, which is an interesting thing about this format and different from last CDS, right? Last point was that my lineup last CDS was worth 109 points, which means I basically got like a bonus champ, like an average bonus champ, like a 10-mana bonus champ, basically for free, right? Which like highlights the difference in like the strength of my lineup versus last lineup, right? All right, let's finally talk about the draft. I've been rambling for a little bit now. I'm going to start by showing the champs in the order that I selected them and the logic for each one individually. If you want to experience the draft as it happened, Margin Bay and Cephalopod both streamed it, although only Margin Bay actually had the spreadsheet on the screen. Cephalopod was just showing his face. Pink Ghost and Dragon at some point later are going to do like a reenactment or a play-by-play commentary where they just go over the draft, sort of like what they did last time. So if you want to watch that, you can wait for that to happen on the CDS channel. I've taken screenshots from Margin's stream, but covered his face and his notes just because I don't know if he wants those to be on my YouTube. In order to show what the field looked like at a given time, you don't need to analyze the field too much. It just is going to be like a brief showing. And then after we do this, after I go through the draft choices, choice by choice, I'm going to analyze my own team as well as every other player's team. And then that'll be the end of the video. All right. So my first pick was Gwen. So Seraphine was immediately picked by Slay because he was the first pick. And then right afterwards, I picked Gwen. Basically, I really like Gwen. Janna was a very, very, very close second choice, but she is like extremely expensive, 15. And I did want SI in my lineup, and I more want SI in my lineup than I want PNZ in my lineup. I could live my life not having PNZ in my lineup. My other first priority champion was Aphelios, but I don't think for Targon he is as necessary. About 15% of Targon champions are pretty flexible. I'm thinking like your Dianas and your Leonas and your Aphelioses and your Zoes. And while that's similar for SI, like Gwen and Elise and like Thresh are vaguely flexible, I think like Gwen accentuates SI more than Aphelios necessarily accentuates Targon like inherently, right? And Aphelios can be clunky sometimes. Sometimes Aphelios is just like not what you need in a matchup, and you think he will be, but is not. But sometimes he's great and he's all you need in a matchup. That's just how Aphelios works. Also, as a side note, like I did have Gwen last time, and because there would be like, 16 decisions before it came back to me, I thought it'd be rather funny to just have Spidz with Gwen at the very start, leaving it up, and like have people think that I might be like doing a repeat, right? And maybe this will force someone to take like Alawi, Nathi, or Avarice or Pantheon, and that'd just be pretty funny. This is an extremely, extremely minor point, but I just think it's funny to first pick a champion that you already picked last time. I think there's something like inherently humorous about this. Anyway, this is a screenshot taken from Margin Base stream. So in round 1, Seraphine went, then we picked Gwen, then it went Aphelios, Victor, Zoe, Vayne, Jinx, Teemo, Janna, Varus. So those were all the first picks that people had. Then Roji it starts from Roji going back. So Roji then after Varus picks Akshan, then it goes to Yasuo, Samira, Jax, Kindred, Jace, Alawi, Diana. What we pick, and then after us, Slay picks Viego. So this is what the screen looked like at the time. And if I go to like my list of tip-top prios, right, Janna and Aphelios had gone. But if you look at my champs of what I wanted for round 2 and 3, only Alawi was gone, meaning that Gnar, Draven, Leona, Nilla, and maybe Fizz were available. So I had a lot of choice. I did not expect to have this much choice. I expected some of these to be gone. And so I sort of just went with my guts. This wasn't a particularly logical, like I logicked this out or anything. I just went with what I felt like would be the most fun for me at the time, right? And vaguely strong, vaguely, just like throw a, gun to my head, what is the best choice, basically. First I went with Leona because I quite like Leona. She's very cool, in my opinion. And then I went with Draven because he is also very cool. I think these are fine. I think Nilla and Gnar are like exactly equal in like goodness for me. So I'm happy that I just went with this. I don't think this is a particularly difficult decision. These are not where like decisions are hard because you have a lot of freedom. So you just sort of like take what you want. And I don't think it's too complicated. All right. In round 3, Nora went, then our Draven, then Ezreal, Elise, Thresh, Soraka, Poppy, Gnar, Karma, and Pantheon. And then flipping back around, Talia, Katarina, Kalista, Vi, Echo, Master Yi, Lux, Twisted Fate, what we end up picking, and then afterwards was Aatrox. This is what the board looked like. Again, you don't have to analyze it. It's just here for posterity. Surprisingly to me, Nilla was still available, so I just took her. Gnar had already been taken at this point. So I just took Nilla because she was there and I wanted her quite badly anyway. So after that, I felt like, based on the logic of before, I really did want a Bandle City dual region by 5th pick. And I was scared that I wouldn't have very desirable ones by 6 and 7. So the bundles that were already taken were Teemo, Poppy, and Gnar, and then there's Nora, but she's not dual region. And the bundles that were available were Fizz, Heimer, Lulu, Yuumi, Ziggs, Rumble, Veigar, and Kennen. Right, and I had in my notes to take a Bandle City by 4th and 5th, so I felt like I should have done so. Now, if Jansport was doing the draft, he would have picked Fizz. That way he doesn't need Nilla, and that way he gets a lot more freedom for his 5th pick, right? Like the Fizz already gets the Bilgewater that he wanted. But anyway, I ended up picking Kennen. So why did I go with Kennen over other champions? First is that the cost, right? Gwen and Leona and Draven and Nilla cost me 46. Kennen, which is the cheapest Bandle City dual region champion, only costed 8. It felt sort of valuable for me, like for economy reasons. Fizz, Yuumi, and Lulu not only share the regions that I've already picked. I mean, Lulu is equidistant to Kennen, but Fizz shares my Bilgewater and Yuumi shares my Targon. And they're also just like not that interesting to me. I'm not a big fan of these champions. Lulu's sort of okay, but not super up my alley. Ziggs and Rumble were very, very close decisions, right? I do not value Shurima probably as highly as I could. Like some people will value Shurima a lot highly than I do. And I already have a Noxus, right, and Draven. And Rumble, as a card, is relatively weak as general Noxus access unless you can play into his package, right? Like, compared to other Bandle City champions such as Fizz, who is pretty decent Bilgewater access, Rumble is just a 4-mana 5/4, unless you're discarding stuff, is, like, not that good. Like, when you're building with Rumble, you either need to consider that he's going to just be, like, a basic unit, or if you want him to be not a basic unit, you are going to have to build your deck around that slightly, compared to something like Kennen or Fizz, where you don't really have to build your deck around it slightly at all. I mean, you can just put it in and you'll be, like, that'll be good enough. Okay, but the decision between Veigar and Kennen was really, really difficult. Like, I spent most of my thinking time just thinking about Veigar or Kennen. Now, already having Gwen felt like a little bit superfluous, and I already have had double SI access in CDS, and it only really helped once when I was fighting Puffball Panda and wanted to do, like, double Mistwraith lineup. So I didn't think Veigar was that necessary, but Veigar is also really good. I think, like, the dual region Bandle Cities are some of the hardest decisions you can possibly make. And I remember in my last draft thoughts, I spent a long time trying to think about the dual regions, and I'm still not happy, and I still think there's like hours and hours more thought you can be putting into this. Because I think like Ziggs and Rumble and Fizz and Lulu and Veigar were all like really, really good alternatives to Kennen. But I went with Kennen because I think Kennen is cool. Now, I think Kennen is the first play that I've made that is questionable. I think Ziggs was a very, very, very strong second choice that I could have considered, and I don't think Veigar, despite having another SI, was that bad either. Like, I do think double SI can be quite fun, and I did practice a lot with double SI, even if I didn't bring it every week. And a different person would have definitely taken Lulu or Fizz, right? Like, there's so many people that would take Lulu and Fizz in this position. And by questionable, I don't mean that, like, what I have done is, like, the best thing, like, Gwen, Leona, and Draven, and Nilla were, like, always the best, like, every single time. But I mean, like for non-Spidzes, it's very possible that, like, you know, Gwen was already a misplay, right? But for me, I think Kennen is the first thing that could have been considered a misplay regarding, like, Bandle City stuff. I could be convinced that Kennen was the bad choice, but I could not be convinced that the other ones were a bad choice based on like the logic I was using, right? Immediately after this pick, Sir Terman does end up picking Vigar, which is a good decision. Like, Sir Terman should have definitely picked Vigar. Vigar is very, very strong for Bandle City and SI access, and he's got a bunch of Targon as well, so he's doing like a slow control-y thing. And there's one more factor that I haven't brought up yet. So I had in my notes to get our Bandle City champion, but if you also remember in my notes, I said that I should pick Caitlyn if she's around by 4 and 5. And if you look at the champions that remain, Caitlyn and Heimerdinger are the only P&Z ones that remain by this point. So I don't think Kennen was a very bad play. I think Kennen was like maybe one of the top 6 champions I could have picked. But I think Caitlyn would have been the best champion I could have picked. I think Caitlyn was the single best champion I could have chosen at this moment. And I think there is basically no way that Caitlyn makes it all the way back around to me because there's so few PNZ champions remaining and people will be wanting them. And Heimer, the other PNZ champion, is extremely wonky for Bandle City and PNZ access. It is like the weirdest champion. I would say like lineup-wise, Heimerdinger is like the weirdest champion to rate. Because like region-wise, he is sort of worth 11, but within those regions, he's worth like 7, unless you get like a really good synergistic champion, and then he's worth like 10. It's very weird to evaluate Heimerdinger. Heimer's like extremely inflexible when it comes to PNZ and Bandle City. Anyway, I think I should have picked Caitlyn. Let's move on to 6 and 7. So in round 5, Kane went, then my Kennen and Sir Terms Vega, then Renekton, Ryze, Zillion, Trundle, Senna, Nocturne, Fiora. And then in round 6, flips back around, Ziggs, Fizz, Anivia, Caitlyn, poor Caitlyn, Ornn, Heimer, there goes the other PNZ, Annie, Evelyn, what we end up picking, and then Slay picks Quinn. So let's revisit the region tier list, right? Like these last 2 choices are about like getting region stuff, right? We have Targon, we have SI, we have Noxus, we can't get PNZ anymore, we have Bandle, we have Buildwater, and we have Ionia. So the only stuff I don't really have is like either Demacia or Shurima and Freljord. The Demacia champions that remained at this point were Jarvan the 4th, Garen and Quinn, Lucian, Galio, and Shyvana. And in my mind, I think like looking at these, the best ones are Quinn and Lucian. These are the best Demacia champions. I didn't expect this many to be around at this point. So I was expecting to have to like making a Demacian decision wasn't going to be that big of an influence in my game, but it ended up being a little bit bigger. They're very flexible and they're not weird to play. Like Shyvana and Jarvan can be quite weird to play. And they're also like cheap, like because Jarvan costs like a bunch more than Garen and Quinn and Lucian. So I ended up picking Lucian due to how non-committal he is, like deck building wise. Quinn was a very, very close second, and in fact, as I mentioned before, Quinn was immediately chosen right after by Slay. Now, the alternative choices for 6 was to go for a Freljordian or for a Shuriman, but there's like, one thing I'm not like clarifying enough is like, I don't have infinite time to make these decisions. Like 5 minutes, or sometimes even just like 3 is like, it sounds like enough time. It is not enough time to be making like high pressure decisions that are influencing your next 9 weeks. Like part of the reason that my draft won't be perfect is because I don't have enough time to think. And that's not a complaint. That's how the format works. It's equal for everyone. Everyone's going to be thinking that and having that sort of thought. But like, I basically pigeonholed myself into thinking like, oh, what Demacian am I getting? Because I wanted a Demacian by around this point. There were many Shurimans remaining, such as Siva, Azir, Nidalee, Xerath, Kaisar, and Rek'Sai. And Freljord just like was not a region I was thinking too much about, so it wasn't really on my mind to think about a Freljord in at this time. All right. With the 7th pick though, I basically spent the whole time thinking, do I want a Shuriman champion or do I want Sejuani, right? I still wanted to get like one more region at this point. I could have doubled up on a region, but at this time I was still thinking like region-wise, because that's what I had said to myself. I'm going to be thinking region-wise. And Sejuani was like by far the best Freljordian champion available. Like it was Sejuani or like Lissandra and like, you know, Ashe and stuff. And like for what I want to do, Sejuani is just like way more up my alley. So I ended up going with Sejuani. Also, like I don't need a Shuriman, so getting Sejuani felt like a much better play for me. All right, let's go to 8th and 9th. So who went? In round 7, there was Riven, then now Sejuani, then Maokai, Jhin, Nasus, Rumble, Lulu, Volibear, Galio, Garen, then flipping back around, Bard, Nico, Darius, Tristana, Set, Yuumi, Shen, Kayle, and Shyvana. I want to mention that a lot of Bandle City champions went, and it really saddened me that Nico went, because I spent a lot of time trying to get Nico. So first off, just want to quickly mention, Kaisar was still available. I don't really like playing Kaisar. She's not really what I like about like Shurima. But like in theory, Lucian unnerfs her. And in theory, Kaisar is like a pretty, like she was one of my budget options that I was thinking about. And she was still available. So at this point, we only have 25 points remaining for our last 3 picks, or our last 2 picks if we want. So we have a few lines to think about mathematically. One was getting Kaisar plus a second Noxus plus a wild card, right? In my head, this was something like Vlad plus something, or Nico plus MF and Jack, right? Because Nico costs 6 and MF and Jack cost about 11. And taking Kaisar gives us like 18 points to play with, right? Another line is only taking 2 champions, right? But which 2, right? If I'm getting something expensive, I'm claiming that Jarvan the Fourth or Sivir or MF or Jack or Lee Sin or Azir are the equivalent of worth of like Kai'Sa and a cheap champion. And when looking at the other cheap champions that were available, things like Asol and Vladimir and the Poro King and Ashe and Gangplank, I do not think I could justify an expensive champion more than those ones that I'm reading there. So in the end, I decided to take Kai'Sa. So now we have 18 points. In my ideal world, for 9 and 10, it's Vladimir and Gangplank. A second Noxus and a second Bilgewater, they synergize a lot with what I have, right? Like, they're pretty good with aggro-slanted mid-range. I think, like, Vladimir can work for Red Gwen. It can work for a Nilla deck. It can work with Sejuani as like a Scars thing. It can work with Lucian. It can work with Kai'Sa, you know, all these sorts of things. You can make Vladimir work pretty well. Same goes for Gangplank. Gangplank just makes a lot of sense with my lineup, I think. Like, I get Plunder, right? I can just bring Plunder every week. Gwen Gangplank doesn't seem that bad to me. Right? Gangplank Draven as aggro, you know, all these sorts of things. I don't think Gangplank is that bad at all. If I start with Gangplank and Vlad is taken, I will only have 8. So if I get Gangplank as my 9th and I wait for 16 rounds before I get to pick my 10th champion, if I start with Gangplank, I only have 8 points to get other champions. Those 8 points could only be going towards Malphite, Aurelion Sol, Tahm Kench, Rek'Sai, Ahri, Xerath, Aurelia, Nautilus, and the Poro King or Pyke. These are not great options, to be honest. Like, very clearly, Vladimir is better than all of those. Like so much. Although I do like Aurelion Sol and Xerath as champions. I think they're fun. If I start with Vladimir, who is like unambiguously weaker than Gangplank, but if I start with Vladimir and then Gangplank does get taken, I will have more options for like my 10th champion, right? Because I'll have the 10 costs and the 9 costs available to me. These include Tryndamere, LeBlanc, Zed, Nidalee, Swain, Taric, Lissandra, Nami, Ashe, Sion, Shyvana, Udyr, Hecarim, and Braum. Which are better. They're not like that much better. Like Nidalee is probably better than like Pyke, and like LeBlanc is probably better than like Kench. But it's not anything special. Like Swain is maybe the best one there. Maybe Ashe is the second best. Maybe Shyvana's not too bad. Anyway, so to clarify, if I picked Vladimir, I think I'd have about an 80% to siege Gangplank on the turnaround. Keep in mind, Gangplank is expensive, and everyone else is also strapped for points. There are only 2 people that are like that have more points than 20 at this point. And I'd very likely not see Vladimir again because he is very clearly the best 8 or less cost champion. Not mana cost. Unless you're Roji, in which case the best 8 or less cost is Malphite. So, you know, obviously, based on all of this logic, I picked Gangplank because I'm silly, and while I was like 80% of the way through these thoughts at this point. Like, I had thought most of this, and then like a little bird inside of me was saying like, but what if Gangplank is gone? What if he's gone? And so I picked Gangplank. This was a misplay. This was like a massive misplay. This is the biggest misplay I did. I should have taken Vladimir 100% of the time because no one was going to take Gangplank, man. And even if I did take Gangplank, like, I'm getting Vladimir plus something that's not that bad. But instead I'm going to get Gangplank, and if Vladimir is gone, and fun fact, Sir Termin takes Vladimir immediately after, just like how he took Veigar right after my cannon, then like I'm stuck with fucking Poro King or like Pyke or something. And I won't show the stream now because it doesn't really matter, but by the final pick, for my 10th champion, my options were Kench, Rek'Sai, Nautilus, Pyke, and the Poro King. I just went with the Poro King. That seemed like the best option that remained. He's fine. And so that's sort of where I landed. This is my roster. Thanks to Pink Ghost for making this. He made one of these for everyone, and they're very, very well made. So to recap, I have Gwen, Leona, Draven, Nilla, Kennen, Lucian, Sejuani, Kai'Sa, Gangplank, and the Poro King. So I don't have PNZ access. It's just the only region I don't have access to, and I am doubling up on Bilgewater access. I think this draft is slightly weaker than last time. I think that there is things that are sort of powerful, like inherently powerful going on. And I think that like if I put enough effort into it, this draft will feel fine and cromulent, but I don't think this draft is anything like super, super, super special. Now, people that watched CDS Draft 1 will realize that like I don't think there's ever going to be a time where I'm going to draft my champions and feel happy about them on the day that I draft them or the week after. It's going to take me like 3 weeks before I feel happy about like this lineup enough for me to like feel confident in it. And if I lose a lot, then like I'm just not going to, right? Because you'll remember last time I didn't really like the champions that I drafted, and that's because you just have to accept that you're not going to get what you want. And it's not going to feel perfect, and like I'm not a confident tournament player. I always assume that I'm going to lose when I go into games. So I always think of the worst case scenarios, right? And I'm seeing that like people will be able to manipulate themselves into me, that I'm not going to be able to win, right? Or do well. But these are my champions. I only have like one 4-mana champion, I think, Yeah, so like that joke, rip that joke, which is fine. I'm not a big fan of that joke anyway. It just sort of happened and I sort of fell into it. I do have like a non-zero amount of 5-mana champions. I've got, 4 of them? And I got 2 1-mana 2/1 quick attacks. But this lineup seems like fine. If you go back to like what decks I like aggro slanted midrange, like that's what Gwen is, that's what Leona is, that's what Draven is, that's what Nila is, that's what Kennen is, that's what Lucian is, that's what, Sejuani and Gangplank are basically. And like late game midrange is also all of these champions, and like they can flex into control if you really want to push it. So I don't think these are awful, and they're just fine. I mean, it may sound like I'm being a bit like paradoxical. Like I'm saying these aren't awful, and I'm also saying I don't like them. That's just how it works. I'm going to quickly go over the enemy gamers. I'm going to be putting them in the order that I'm playing against them, because this knowledge is public. So my first enemy gamer is actually Slay, who was the pick before me, and in the top right you can see what round I'm fighting these players. So Slay has got Seraphine, Viego, Nora, Aatrox Kayn, Quinn, Riven, Shyvana, Asol, and Pyke. Now, I'm not going to talk about what my strategies are going to be necessarily fighting them. When I fight them, you will see that in that video. But I want to point out like what sort of decks like Slay is probably thinking about making. So like Aatrox Kayn, I think is a very obvious one. He's also got Aatrox Quinn if you want to do Kayn with someone else. He's got dragons, very clearly, and he's also got like Nora Viego, right? So like if we're comparing this to last CDS, right? Like he's got 3 pretty big like beefy mid-range decks. But if he wants to flex a little, he does have Seraphine plus Viego or Seraphine plus Nora, which isn't going to be the worst thing in the world. Riven can do some really cute things in like a combo aggro deck, and he just picked Pyke because he had 6 points, and Pyke was the only one available by the time it went to him. So like you can mostly ignore Pyke. I'd be surprised if he brought Pyke unless like Bilgewater, like he just wanted to play heavy metal or something like that, right? All right, in round 2, I'm fighting Winsett Warriors, who is J-Sensational. He has Janna, Yasuo, Karma, Katarina, Nocturne, Fizz, Galio, Nico, Udyr, and Lee Sin. This should give you like a bit of memory of Ikado's lineup from last time, who was definitely one of the favorites to win. It's slightly less strong than Ikado's, I think. Like Janna is a big boon, but there isn't a Leona, and there isn't a lot of like the mid-range presence that is overly scary. Like the mid-range presence right now is like Yasuo Katarina, which I'm pretty sure Ikado had access to last time, as well as Galio Udyr, which like it's a mid-range deck, but you can prepare for Galio Udyr. What I'm expecting is stuff like Spooky Karma with the Nocturne and Karma, and Katarina Yasuo. I think Fizz Lee Sin is like a sleeper choice, and I think Nico is unironically one of the best parts of this lineup. I really, really highly value Nico, and if Nico came back to me, I would have snapped her up so quickly. Dizimundo RNG, which is L Games Brazil, has got Teemo, Samira, Na, Kalista, Senna, Anivia, Volibear, Darius, Tryndamere, and Irelia. Now, this reminds me a lot of Elzorn's lineup last time. There are 4 Freljordian champions right now, and so I'm expecting to fight Freljord when I fight Dizimundo RNG to some extent. There are some decks that I think are interesting here. Like I think Samira Na can do some very interesting things. I think like Senna plus Freljord can do interesting things, and I think like Darius is not that bad. I think there's interesting things that can go on here, but I do not think it is the strongest thing because like 4 regions are missing from the region roster. Like there's no Demacia, Bilgewater, Targon, or Shurima. The week afterwards, I will be fighting Grandpa Roji as the extrusive elementals. And if you know anything about Roji pretty much got everything he could possibly want in life. He's got Varus, who is basically like Roji in a nutshell, but it's got Varus, Akshan, Pantheon, Talia, Fiora, Ziggs, Garen, Bard, Malphite, and Xerath. So like Roji has Varus Pantheon, Varus Akshan, Akshan Pantheon, Talia Ziggs, Talia Xerath, Xerath Ziggs, Fiora Pantheon, Fiora plus anything he fucking wants, Ziggs Xerath, Garen Bard, Garen plus anything the hell he wants, and Malphite Talia, right? All Roji likes is playing big dumb mid-range and having high numbers and units that have bigger stats than the enemy gamer. If Roji could play like blocking Badger Bear and then like a 5-mana blocking Badger Bear that has like, even more stats and a 7-mana blocking Badger Bear that has even more stats, like he would. That's just what Roji wants to do in life. So Roji got pretty much everything he wanted. Like you're going to see his regions and be like, what? He only has 4 regions? But you must realize that for Roji, regions are meaningless. All he wants to do is bash. Like, if Rika Rex can get away with just playing Battle Fury every game, Roji can get away with just playing, like, Varus Bow or, like, Grappling Hook and all that sort of stuff every game, and he'll be happy. All right. Cephalopod, who I think has the best draft, and if I was to have anyone else's draft, I would pick Cephalopods. I think Cephalopods has, like, my second favorite draft. He has Vayne, Kindred, Soraka, Echo, Zillion, Ornn, Rumble, Set, and Jack, and Ari. So I think Vayne is like one of the best Demacian champions. If you could pick any Demacian champion, it would be Vayne. And when watching his thoughts and his stream, and he will have a video on his thoughts sometime later this week, is my understanding. Vayne is probably one of the champions that was a bit undercosted for value, right? Like I did say that like undercosted for value wasn't too prominent, but I think like Cephalopod did pay a lot of attention to undercosted for value and did get a lot of value out of this. And I'll talk more about Cephalopod's drafting strategy a little bit later in my post-draft thoughts. But Cephalopod has access to every region. He's got access to some really inherently strong decks, such as Vayne, Rumble, Echo Zillion, Jack Set, but also like good flexible champions in like Kindred and Ari when he wants to go into those champions and into those regions. I do think Echo is one of the weakest PNZ champions for general PNZ access, but you know, like end of the day, it's just 3 copies of a champion and like you can play him. Like I've done that with Darius before. Darius has sometimes just been 3 copies of a champion, and like Tarek has sometimes just been 3 copies of a champion. And it hasn't killed me if the deck was strong enough and right enough for the given meta. So I think Cephalopod's got my second favorite lineup, and I would, if I was to switch with anyone, I would switch to Cephalopod like right now. Like if he DM'd me and was like, hey, do you want to switch lineups? Like he would be the only one that I'd really think heavily about. But the second most lineup that I like is Shardox's. Shardox has Victor, Alawi, Elise, Lux, Renekton, Annie and Jin, and then Shen and Tarek. This is 3 of the champions that I had last time. Roji also had 3 of the champions that I had last time in Alawi, Shen, and Tarek. And I don't think this lineup is too bad. I think like for a 9-champion roster, this is pretty powerful, right? There's a lot of like high inherent strength here, right? In Victor, in Alawi, in Annie Jin as a deck, in Elise, in Renekton. I don't think this is a bad lineup at all. It is just like, it is vaguely clear what Canadian Chimes lanes are trying to do. If Shardox wanted to switch lineups, he would be the second one I'd most consider. I would probably be more likely to deny it. But, you know, if I was like, if CDS was a video game, this is going to sound weird. If CDS was a video game and these 10 were like your character selects, like, you know, these were the 10 choices, you know, my lineup or Slay's lineup or Shardox's, Shardox would be like my second favorite character to play. And I think Cephalopod would be my first favorite character to play. Then the third would probably be me. And then the fourth would be, I don't know who the fourth would be. But like, if I could like exist in an ethereal world and play as with anyone's lineups, Shardox would be like second high up there. All right. After that, in round 7, we are fighting Sir Termund, who, like, unironically, I'm so glad Sir Termund's here. Sir Termund's my goat, man. I love Sir Termund. Anyway, he is the Empire's Gladiators, and he has got Diana, Aphelios, Ezreal, Twisted Fate, Vigar, Evelyn, Maokai, Kael, Vladimir. You know what? This is probably the third most that I like. Diana and Aphelios and Evelyn are some of my favorite champions. And like the Vigar and Vladimir logic were logic I really liked. And I think Kael is very similar logic-wise. If I didn't have Leona, I think Kael would have been one of the things I was like heavily considering, right? I don't care too much for Twisted Fate, Maokai, and Ezreal. I think they're like very good access for those regions, but I just don't think they're necessary. Or they don't give me like a high sense of like satisfaction. But I think this lineup's very, very good. I think it's very, very strong. Despite missing 4 regions, I think these 4 regions are the 4 regions you are most willing to not have to need, right? I think Freljord and Ione are 2 of the weakest regions for a draft format like this one. And I think like, you know, you don't have to have that mid-range access in Shurima and Demacia, and I honestly think Runeterran could be included in Shurima and Demacia as just like general mid-range access, which is what Evelyn gives you, right? So I don't think this lineup is that bad at all. I think this lineup can do quite well, and if I was to play with a different person's lineup, Sir Termund would be like my third favorite lineup to play with. All right, round 8, we have the Bandle City Buster Shots. They have Jinx, Jax, Poppy, Vi, Trundle, Caitlyn, Lulu, Tristana, and Hecarim. Now, you might look at this and be like, I don't understand what is going on. So I'm just going to say to you the word timelines, and then everything should hopefully click. Because what Bandle City Buster Shots has is Jax timelines, Trundle timelines, and Bandle City timelines. And those are the 3 timelines decks. Now, they are not fully subscribed into triple timelines. They can do other things, right? You can create like aggro Bandle City PNZ decks, right? Like Lulu Jinx, right? Like you've got that, right? You can even do Lulu Jinx Ionia and then do like Caitlyn, Tristana, the other thing, right? Like this will also be triple aggro. Like Poppy Jax will be a final triple aggro deck, right? Like this is triple aggro and triple timelines, but once you remember that timelines exists, that's all you need to like realize in order to like make this make sense in your brain, I think. Finally, we have Margin Bay with the Ionian Idiots, who has Zoe, Jace, Thresh, Yi, Ryze, Heimerdinger, Nasus, Yuumi, Ashe, and Nami. This should remind you a lot of what Capitao Circuit had last time in the Jace, Ryze, and Yi, as well as like, vague Heimer stuff, like Heimer Jace as a deck is similar to Jace Lux. And Circuit was like one of the favorites. Like he was second place. Like he didn't have a bad lineup. So I think like Margin Bay should not be mistreated. I think Margin Bay is a decent lineup. But like, name Margin Bay's decks, right? Like you have Zoe Jace, which can be good. And you do have Jace, Heimerdinger, and then one Thresh to give you the Shadow Isles access. You do have Zoe Yi, but after that, like you're saying Spooky Karma, or you're saying like Yuumi plus another thing, and they're just champions that aren't doing anything. You've got Nami, but like why? Bilgewater like Yi for like a Bilgewater Ionia deck. Like it is hard to say what the champions and the decks will be, but you can make some, and with enough brewing, I think Margin Bay could eventually have like a really good lineup.
All right, I should just like quickly mention, I somehow completely missed Thresh Nasus. Margin Bay can make decks, man. I don't know what I was talking about. Anyway.
All right, and those are all the champions. So let's quickly go over some post-draft theory thoughts. I think that Lucian may have been superfluous. I think that I did not need to take Lucian, and Lucian is probably a little bit low tier compared to like the rest of my other champions. I think Leona's also similar. I think I did overpay for Leona just because I like Leona, and I don't think it was like efficient or correct, because I don't think Leona is that strong. She just feels strong to me because I like her, right? Caitlyn was a better choice over Kennen. That could be disargued. I don't think Kennen was like a bad choice, but I think Gangplank was like an actively bad choice because Vladimir is like unambiguously stronger. However, in general, like if I wasn't playing and like a third person asked me like, hey, what did you want from a draft, right? My answer, like my ideal draft, absent of the cost of things and absent of like other players, my ideal draft is Gwen, Draven, Leona, Gnar, Bilgewater access, PNZ access, either Vayne and Fiora, a second mid-range Runeterran or Shuriman champion, a second SI champion, and then a second access to Bilgewater, Bandle City, Noxus, or access to Ionia. And to be honest with you, this is like pretty close to what I got, right? Like I didn't get a PNZ champion, I didn't get a second SI, and I did get one too many mid-range Shuriman or Runeterrans, right? Because I have like Kai'Sa and Poriking, I only needed one of those. I've misspelled Kennen, but I got Kennen instead of Gnar. But when you factor in cost points and other players, like it is hard to get better than what I did get compared to like what my ideal draft is. The only question is like, is my ideal draft even good enough to win, right? Like I don't know if Leona is like necessary for like the ideal draft to win, right? I don't know if I just like Leona too much and I'm blinded by my like for her, right? I think that Cephalopod has the best lineup logic-wise. I think he was the most well-prepared, and maybe that's just because I watched his thoughts. I expect him to win the tournament. That's my expectation. I think Cephalopod's the most likely winner. I think Roji could be second, but I think like it is up to us to like prep for Roji and make him not win. By us, I mean like the 9 of us, not me specifically, Spidz from Arcane. But I think Cephalopod's got the best strategy. Cephalopod's drafting strategy, which you'll hear more about from him when he does it, should have been more employed by I. So one of the things that Cephalopod did, and if we go back to Cephalopod's lineup, this is in order that he drafted it in. Set and Jack were not cheap. They were expensive. But what he managed to do is, like, when I was talking about mathing out options for the last 3 champions, he was sort of mathing out options for, like, the last 6 or 5. And he was able to get Set and Jack, who were high cost, because he was the only one that could afford them by, like, round 6. Like, by the time, before he even picks Rumble, like, he can make a decision. Like, I will be available for Set and Jack, and pretty much no one will be able to contest those. And even if they do, the alternative is, like, Misfortune. And that's, like, not that much worse compared to Jack. It is worse, but, like, it's not that much worse. While everyone else started high and scrambled for the bottom. Last time when I did the draft, I started low and then got my S and A tiers towards the end, right? Or I got my S tier towards the end. Cephalopod just did the same thing as I did last time in that logic, but managed to transpose that into the logic necessary for the point buy system. And with the limited time that I had to prepare, because I was busy with other things and I didn't have that much time to think about it, I just didn't do that. And I think Cephalopod being able to transpose that logic, which was pretty important for me being able to win last time, means that I like Cephalopod is definitely my favorite to win. Like I cannot put into words how much I think Cephalopod managed to logic himself into this draft based on a lot of logic I did last time. Now, I don't think my logic is inherently bad. I think my logic wasn't ungrounded, but I really like what Cephalopod thought of and ended up doing, especially regarding the Set and Jack. And I think like My downfall will be that I didn't have enough time to think about the draft, which means like the next 9 weeks are going to be influenced by a slightly poor efforted drafting logic. And it'll be Seth's uprise, which is very clearly the opposite of downfall. One thing that you have not heard me mention, probably a single time, is like, what is good in Eternal? Because I didn't think about this at all until I watched Cephalopod and Margin Bay stream and realized that those guys spoke about Cosmic Call. And the words Cosmic Call never ended up in my mind until after the draft. Now, specifically Cosmic Call is not why I'm bringing this up. Moreover, I was not thinking a single bit about like, what is the Eternal meta? What is strong? Last time, what the meta was didn't matter an iota, right? I may have mentioned Broadmain once because Broadmain was pretty big, but like that was just influencing the strength of Noxus as a region. That was pretty much it. So what you'll notice is like Cephalopod. If you actually, not Cephalopod, Sir Termid. If you look at Sir Termid, aka the GOAT, what he picked, right? He picked 3 Targonian champions. Margin Bay picked 2 Ionian champions, and he picked Yuumi just because he needed another Cosmic Call deck. Zoe Jace is a Cosmic Call deck, and he's going to bring that every single week, unless he brings Time Bidding, right? So people are going to be bringing Cosmic Call because that's what they think Eternal is strong as. And that is true, right? Like, it's Cosmic Call is strong. So is, like, Sump Monument stuff. Like, that's why PNZ went quite quickly as well. That's just, like, not what was on my mind because I don't think that's how I viewed the draft last time enough. And so I didn't think about doing it this time. But, like, this is something I possibly could have thought of because last time I also was thinking that Varus Pantheon is a strong deck and I was thinking that like Pantheon Fiora, like I was thinking a lot more in decks. While if you look at my draft right now, like there are decks here, like there is Plunder, but like name a deck that isn't Plunder that I've got in my draft right now. And like there isn't, right? Like there isn't an actual name of a deck that is known. Unlike last time where I had like 7 or 8 deck names that I could have mentioned, right? And I think that's important to analyze. And I think that's like one of the inherent weaknesses, right? Last time I had very inherently strong decks, such as Varus Pantheon, Shen Alawi, Fiora. This time I don't. I don't have that. So therefore, like, and like, I know I'm making this a big point. Compare this to Roji, man. Roji's got 10 decks you can name right on the start. I don't have that. And so I don't have inherently strong of a lineup, right? I have to like make my lineup become strong via deck building. And that could be possible. But last time, I pretty much did that for one deck every week, and then my other decks were like inherently strong meta choices, right? Things like Varus Pantheon, things like Alawi Fiora, and that is not the case this time. So I think like compared to last draft, the practice of fighting will be a lot harder for me, like a lot harder, and that is one of the reasons that I do not expect to win. The final thing I want to mention is that like there is more opportunity for me to be flexible with my champions, right? The remaining champions that are in the pool are Siva, who is worth 14, Jarvan, who is worth 13, Misfortune, who is worth 12, Azir, who's worth 11, LeBlanc, Zed, Nidalee, and Swain, who are worth 10, Lissandra, Braum, and Sion, who are worth 9, Time Kenshin, and Rek'Sai, who are worth 8, and Nautilus, who is worth 7. At any time, I need to do it like a few days before the games, just so everyone can prepare, but at any time, I could drop the Poro King, get like Nautilus, and play Gwen deep, right? And just like not have Maokai, but like pretty much just be playing deep, right? Or like I could remove Kaisar and just do that, right? This is something that I have access to, right? My champ pool looks like it's got 10 champions. In theory, I've got access to like 6 more that I can change at any time, 3 times in the season, right? That does change theory. Like if I am on week 8 and I need to win my next 2 games, and I know that like deep is one of the ways I could win my next 2 games, just draft Nautilus and win, right? Just get those games, get into the top 6, and then figure out the finals later, right? I could also remove 2 cheap champions, for example, Kaisar and the Poro King, for an expensive champion like Azir or Jarvan if I wanted to, right? Because Jarvan is more inherently strong than Kaisar and the Poro King. And if I wanted to play like a Nilla, Jarvan, like scoutsy sort of deck, I could do that, right? Last 3 things I want to mention before this video closes out. What can you expect out of Spidz YouTube for CDS? Weekly VOD reviews or theory explanations, sort of like what I did last time. Probably without montages, unless I'm really up to them, because those montages took a lot of time. My hope is that I get around to streaming at least one of these matches because I just want to try it once. It's not something that I'm going to hold myself to. If that doesn't happen, it won't bother me. It's not a big deal. Finally, it's the Spidz YouTube interview, because there are interviews on the CDS. About half of them are already done. The Spidz YouTube interview will be up at some point. I have a joke that I'm proud of in it, so please check it out just for that joke. There's a joke that I really like, and so please watch it just for that. I should mention that I do have like my uni exams over the next 2 weeks. So like for the first 2 weeks or first 3 weeks, I might end up being super lax. I might not even make a video, or the video, literally it might just be me hopping in a call with someone and just talking and then uploading that without putting any effort into like intros and stuff, right? All right, second. It's been a little while since there's been Spidz YouTubes. Like, what's happened? Why has it been so long? The short answer is that I was busy. And busy. I haven't been busy this whole time. I was just busy for like a few weeks after the finals for CDS and like the week 7 of the CDS. And LoR is like a rather temporal game. And what I mean by that is like, if I was to upload like my CDS finals VOD review like 5 days ago, right? Who cares? Like genuinely, who cares? I don't really care. It's been so long, so I have no like desire to make it. Circuit doesn't care. That game was ages ago. Who really cares about that, right? And like Pink Ghost, like, you know, he might appreciate it because Pog more CDS, but like really, it's not that important. And like in terms of like reviewing the games, like there were interesting decisions to review. I still have the recording that I did with Eniamore where we went over those games. Like I still have this content that I could turn into something, but I just there's no interest, right? There's no interest from me. There's no interest from a viewer's perspective. There just feels like there's no reason to make it. That's a hyperbolization. But like even within LoR, like waiting 2 weeks and there's a new patch or even just the meta shifts makes things like a VOD review like less interesting. Now VOD reviews obviously a little bit more, they have a bit more staying power than something like a daily Sir Termund or a Margin Bay that pretty much has just the staying power of one, if the deck is ever strong again, or for the temporary time that the meta could allow for those matchups to be present. Wait like 2 weeks after like a Margin Bay video and like there's no real reason to watch it, right? If it's just like, you know, we're playing Jananilla. Well, Jananilla is a bad example because that deck will be around forever. But like, you know, if he's making a video on like Jaxorn or Heimer Jace, there's like a pretty reasonable expectation to think that like the matchups that he sees in that deck and the way the deck is constructed or even the meta will not allow for it in future, right? And because LoR is a temporal game, it makes it hard for me to justify making content that is high effort. Because the more effort it takes, the more time it takes. And the more time it takes, the less relevant it becomes. And it's not that like chasing relevant highs is too important to me, right? But what is important to me is creating stuff that I can feel proud of, right? Everything that I upload, I want to have some level of pride into. Like I made something that represents my thoughts and has value to someone. And if it doesn't have value to someone, I don't really see what is the point of making it. Like that's what's valuable to me, right? So I am working on other things, and some of them aren't even LoR related that I think will be able to do that. Something that like you could watch it on the day that it's uploaded and watch it like 2 years later, and it will have the same amount of value, right? And there's also another project that is LoR related, but feeds into the temporal nature really uniquely and coolly in a way that I haven't seen anyone else do. Those I'm excited for. There will also be the CDS videos over the next 9 weeks, and there will also be Aegis videos for the next 2 weeks and maybe 3 if we make it into finals. So there will be more like regular Spidz YouTube in terms of like just the VOD reviews where I spend a couple hours recording myself and then a couple hours re-listening and making sure that I don't say anything silly and then upload it, right? But that's what's been happening. If you've been missing Spidz YouTube, short answer is that I got busy and then there wasn't really anything I wanted to make content of that was temporal. I did work on one thing for about a week or so. And then like by that point, it was a week after the Open. I was just going to do a highly edited VOD review on the Open, like something that was a way more scripted and interesting and more analytical because I had planned it. And I got like a couple games into that. Like I wanted to do like maybe 4 or 5 rounds and I only got like 1 or 2 games into it. And then like it was a week later and I was like, who cares about the Heart of the Huntress Open at this point? No one cares. This isn't relevant. So, but that experience and that knowledge has helped me like work out what kind of stuff that I do want to make. I've also been trying a few new editing processes that hopefully when I do a high effort video will allow it to be quicker and more easy to produce. Not necessarily rushed, just like I've got more systems. So this is more like back-end stuff that affects me. But in terms of Spidz YouTube, like I'm hoping there's some interesting stuff coming around soon. I'm hoping that I can share some of these secret projects eventually once they're done. They won't be around for like a month or so. Like one of the secret projects I'll start doing in maybe about 3 weeks, and another one, or one of the ones I'm hoping to have uploaded rather in about 3 weeks, and the other one I'll hopefully have uploaded in about 6 weeks. But I'm really excited for them. I think they're very cool, and I'm giddy thinking about them. Okay, final thing. If you're sitting there thinking like, man, I love the Champion Draft Series so much. If only there were a Discord server with Champion Draft Series related events and things I can do and support the people in the Champion Draft Series and, you know, be able to participate in like things that Pink Ghost sets up for us that, you know, allows us to influence the Champion Draft Series in some capacity. And also that I love spreadsheets and I want to have access to a beautiful CDS related spreadsheet. Well, guess what? You can go to the description. You know, this is very silly. I mean, loving spreadsheets is not silly. Like that space, everyone should love spreadsheets. But there is a Discord server, and Pink Ghost is planning on running things with the community. And because like I sort of see eye to eye with Pink Ghost in a lot of like the desire of this being like a fervent content creation like machine and arm, right? In the same way that like it's important to have like propaganda arms if you're the leader of a government system. So like I really highly value like the content churning, because like that's what I think LOR needs. It needs like more interesting content besides just like YouTube gameplay and like Twitch gameplay, right? And like Sarah helps that a lot with the daily discussion posts. And I think there's a few things on Twitter that people do, like, but that's pretty much it, right? Jay Sensational, by the way, has done like the best stuff for LOR content in terms of like and Snooey, obviously, Snooey with the rare and stuff. But Jay Sensational with the Jeopardy, like those are the sort of things that I want to see, and I'm hoping that like CDS can be among those ranks. That's like my desire, and it's definitely Pink Ghost's desire. And so if you want to be like part of that and try and like make this goal come to fruition, you should join the Discord server. That's everything I wanted to talk about. So see you next time. I had to re-record this last section twice, but I'm really glad I only had to record the last like 5 minutes as opposed to the last an hour and a half or whatever. But thank you all for joining me, and I shall see you next time for round 1, whenever that happens. Unless I don't upload it because I have exams, which is maybe more likely than you think. All right, bye.